First reading today, the story of the testing of Abraham has been quite a stumbling block, quite a shocking tale across the centuries. The Jerome Biblical Commentary calls it a masterpiece, the story, showing how God's demands are absolute, his will inscrutable, and his final word is grace. Well, that's well said, but it's still shocking. And many Jews, beginning with Jews, but Christians and throughout the centuries have really found it insupportable. I've seen many dramatizations of that. Just recently there was a TV show in which a young woman refused confirmation because she couldn't believe in a God that would behave that way. Well, I mean, it is true, first of all, that we should not, like many of the stories we've already seen in Genesis, like the flood last week, we can't take it exactly literally, that this is exactly literally what happened. What would that even mean? I mean, that a man heard a voice telling him to kill his child? Wow, that would really be a problem. So how should we take it? I mean, again, like all these stories, they are communicating a truth, a deep truth about us and our relationship with God. Well, for example, modern scholars for a long time now have pointed out that it's precisely that, a story which shows that God does not approve of human sacrifice, which was a problem at the time and a problem in the ancient world, and was still a problem for some of the kings that came after in Israel, if you read the scriptures. So precisely showing that God does not want that, because, of course, he didn't carry it through. But especially in the Christian context, I think there's a much deeper meaning here. And the second reading brings it out very clearly from Romans, where it says, God is on our side. If God is on our side and Jesus intercedes for us and he died and rose for us, if God did not spare his only Son, it says, how would he not give us everything besides? In other words, it was not that God asked someone else to sacrifice his only Son. God himself sacrificed his only Son. There's even an image in that passage from Genesis where Isaac is on the way to the mountain and he's carrying the wood for the sacrifice on his back. And the fathers of the church pointed out, of course, that's what Jesus did on his way to Calvary, carrying the wood for the sacrifice on his back. But again, we even that's been misinterpreted. Instead of saying, God loved us so much he didn't spare his only Son, or God so loved the world, as John's Gospel says, that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him might not perish but have eternal life, we turned it around to mean God didn't just ask the bloody sacrifice from Abraham, he asked it of Jesus. And the only way the Father could be placated in his wrath was that his own Son, should shed his blood, and make good the sin, placate God for the sin. So, I mean, that's just as bad, right? So we have to turn it around, as I say, more in line with the scriptures themselves, as I've just quoted, as the second reading says, that God wasn't sparing himself. God was engaged. God made the sacrifice to begin with. And what is the sacrifice? Again, not putting his Son into the world to sacrifice to himself, to placate his own wrath, which is absurd, but rather to express his love for us, as John's Gospel says. How is that? Well, by sending his Son in solidarity with our human predicament. Call it original sin or the human condition or evolution or whatever you want. We are in a mess. There's so much that we can't manage so much that we can't see. So God sent his own Son so that as in his humanity, he might show us how to live and how to see and how to die. So it was an act of solidarity. No matter how much it cost God, he would be in solidarity with us. No matter how much it cost Jesus, he would stay in solidarity with us. So God didn't spare himself. And Jesus, the Son of God, didn't spare himself. He stayed in solidarity with us no matter what it cost. And what it cost was, we stupid humans, not accepting the message and the life of Jesus, but trying to get rid of him because it interfered with our agendas, our power agendas, the empire and the religious establishment, etc., which is still a problem. But despite what was going to happen, if he came announcing the good news of God and God's love to the world, he still came and announced the good news of God's love and solidarity to the world. And that's who God is. So it's the kenosis, as Paul calls it to the Philippians, pouring himself out. That's what God does. That's what God's life and light and love do and are, pouring themselves out. First of all to Jesus in the Trinity, first of all within the Trinity, and then to Jesus and his humanity, and then to all of us. Jesus himself being the mirror of that and the messenger of that and the reflection of that in the world, pouring himself out in the incarnation, pouring himself out during his lifetime, pouring himself out, emptying himself in the passion, and that continues. As the second reading says, he's there interceding for us. So that pouring out in love and solidarity with us in our misery and our sin and our resistance and all of that, in solidarity with that, he's revealing who God is, which is that pouring, uncalculating, unrelenting, inexhaustible pouring out of life and love within the Trinity and then into the world, in and through Christ. So one of the reasons we have this gospel during Lent, at the beginning of Lent, is to foreshadow as the cross and foreshadow what Jesus was going to do. Some even have said, it's to modify the scandal of the cross. They would see Jesus utterly humiliated, but they will at least have seen his glory and believe in that glory no matter what happened. But it's more than that. It's the fact that the love of God, the pouring oneself out that God is and that Jesus is, was consummately and fully revealed in the cross, right? As I've been saying, because that's where his solidarity with us, in the midst of our suffering, in the midst of our sin, in the midst of all that injustice that we inflict on one another, he took it on himself. And by the way, he lived it. You say in obedience to the Father. Yes, well, in obedience just to the human condition, in surrender to it, with forgiveness, forgive them for they know not what they do, in complete abandonment to the Father's love, sticking with it to the very end. That shows the extent of his love and gives us the power and the example. Yes, the example and the power to do the same ourselves. So in that sense, Jesus did have to die. Because it's only in that final act of surrender that we all hopefully go through in death, that final act of surrender and pouring oneself out, that, as Jesus himself said, it is consummated, it is finished, it's finally perfected. If he takes on the human condition, he takes on birth and he takes on death. And of course, in this case, terrible death, as happens to many. But that's precisely where and how the love of God is revealed to us. You'll go that far in Christ for us and with us. So that's how we should interpret the light of the Transfiguration. What was revealed in the Transfiguration? The radiance and the brilliance and the magnificence of God's light, life, and love, which are the same thing. God's light, life, and love. So the brilliance that's revealed there is precisely the love that's poured out. Just like you can't imagine electric current that's not flowing. That's how you get the light. It's the same with God's love. It's not visible, it's not light, life, and love unless it's flowing. And so that's the love, the light, the life, and love that was flowing through Christ. That was what was luminous. That was what was so luminous. God's love and light and life manifest in Jesus. And it's always there, but the disciples saw it. The apostles saw it. And that's what should happen then to us. The Father says, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." Better be transformed in him. His life and love are coming to invade you and penetrate you and suffuse you and lift you up and transform you so that you are transfigured, so that you radiate this same light and life and love, so that you can, in turn, in and with Christ, pour yourselves out in and with Christ to God, yes, but to the world, as Jesus did. And you will shine with the radiance of God's self. Jesus says that the just shall shine like the sun in the kingdom of the Father. Well, that's how. Because that sun, the sun, S-O-N, S-U-N, is that light and life of God revealed and shining and brilliant. It's pouring oneself out. So even in heaven, or especially in heaven, that's what heaven means. It's this constant pouring out of life and love to the whole universe, to God, to one another. First of all received, and then given freely. So that in the end, it's not just that we listen to the beloved Son, but that God himself, the Father, says to us, "You are my beloved son or daughter. You are my beloved child. Because you are sharing in my life and love, and you are pouring it out to the world, to the universe, as I do." And that's our destiny. In and with Christ, to pour ourselves out in this world and beyond, certainly through death. But God started it, and God continues it, and God completes it. He doesn't spare himself. Christ doesn't spare himself, and we can't spare ourselves. And spare ourselves for what? Hold ourselves back so we're not alive and anymore, or full of love anymore, or full of life anymore? Of course not. That has to flow. Life has to flow. Light has to flow. Love has to flow from all eternity into all eternity. So that's what the stories are all about, really, revealing who God really is. Asking total gift of self, because God is already total gift of self. Not asking any more than he already is. And Christ is the revelation of that. And in and through him, we become a revelation of that to the world, as we allow that gift of life and light and love to flow through us as well, as his beloved children.